Athena, Lisa, it's 5:30. I think we can start. We have a good number of attendees as well. So over to you.
Okay, get started then. Okay, can folks type in the chat if you can see me, see us, and hear us? See us and hear me. Perfect. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Love a good exclamation point. So welcome everyone. My name is Athena Lau, and I'm my colleague Lisa Piro. We're from Admissionato, and we are really excited to talk with you. It's morning our time and evening your time about building your profile for undergraduate or graduate admissions. So the way that this is going to go today is that we will introduce a little bit about ourselves. We're going to give you an overview of what's kind of going on in the world today and how that might be affecting higher education admissions. I'll talk a little bit about undergrad. Lisa will talk about grad and MBA admissions, and then we'll be able to answer, hopefully, some of your big questions from today. So we'll also both be managing the chat while we do this. So please excuse us if you see our eyes kind of looking back and forth. That's just us trying to make sure we cover everything we're supposed to. Okay, so you can see our faces here. So a little bit about Admissionato. We are a premier applications consulting and mentorship firm. We have worked with thousands of students from from high school, from college, applying to graduate and MBA programs. And we are pretty strict in terms of who we recruit. We only want the best, working with you all, the best. So you can learn a little bit more about us at our website here. So Lisa, if you'd like to introduce yourself first, that'd be great.
Yes, hi, I'm Lisa Piro. I'm originally from New York, but I have lived all over the US. I have my undergraduate from Yale and my MBA and my doctorate in marketing from Harvard Business School. I have spent most of my career in higher education, teaching in business schools online and on the ground. And I am really excited to be here today to talk to you a little bit later in this session about grad school admissions and particularly about MBA admissions as well. So I'll turn it back over to you, Athena.
Thank you. And yeah, just let me know. I have a note here. If you're not hearing my voice, hopefully it's just a passing tech thing. But I am from Athens, Georgia. I went to Harvard for undergrad and the Graduate School of Education at the University of Pennsylvania, where I specialized in international educational development. And so I'm the daughter of Filipino immigrants. I grew up in Athens, Georgia, though. Anyone here, put in the chat, have you been to Georgia? Atlanta, maybe? Heard of Georgia? Let me know. Okay, maybe no love for Georgia today. Okay, not yet. That's a great attitude. Love that. So I have lived, worked, traveled to a lot of different countries around the world. Right now I'm based in New York City. So that might be another place that is on your list of places to travel. Only the Atlanta airport. Okay, I hope you get to experience more of it next time. And I had the privilege of traveling to India 2 years ago before the pandemic, and I hope to go back again soon. All right, the state of Georgia. Okay, yeah, me too, state of Georgia. Okay, so I explained a little bit about what we will talk about today. So I have the words secret sauce here because I know that, well, we know that's what you all are looking for. What is it exactly that we should focus on in our applications? Okay, so just to launch in, the world as we know it today, you might be wondering, has COVID-19 really impacted applications, and if so, how? So here's a little bit of an overview of what's happening now. As you know, as you heard in the news, as you might have heard from some of your friends who are attending schools elsewhere, life for students was turned upside down. And for a lot of faculty, I will say too, probably Lisa would agree. There's a lot of adjustment that had to go on, switching to online learning, trying to figure out the different health regulations that changed because of COVID. So that was pretty crazy for people. A lot of times too in admissions, schools struggled or had to figure out how to maybe change the admissions processes so that students felt that they could still apply to the school and work through a lot of the different stresses going on in their lives. So a lot of schools went test optional or granted waivers for this requirement, and in turn also looked more closely at grades or other elements of the application than they might have even before. Also, we're seeing now that with the development of the vaccines, a lot of schools are making mandatory vaccines, and sometimes what is available in your country might not match up with what a school in the US wants you to take. So that's something that current and admitted students are facing now. So you might be wondering, okay, well, what about, different kinds of schools I might be applying to? What was their competitiveness like during this season? So we did see that at the very top echelon of schools at the undergrad level, there was record-breaking competitiveness. Rates were even lower, even a percentage point lower than they were in previous years. For some other schools, though, their rates remained steady, and at some schools that were maybe lower ranked, they were also struggling to recruit. So the impacts of COVID differed depending on the rankings of schools, and we expect to see at this point that probably that competitiveness will continue at this point, but to what extent, we can't say. Lisa, did you want to share any more about the grad school trends?
Yeah, no, I think you summarized it quite well here. We're really in a state of flux right now, and depending on when you plan on applying, that will really influence how much information we have about specific things like test scores. And there are schools that are still continuing to waive required test scores, but taking them optionally. And that's something that you'll want to consider whether you think that your test score can boost your application. But right now, we're just on a year by year, seeing what's coming through the pipeline for the following upcoming admission cycle.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so, if your question today is, what are my chances for if I'm applying this year for September 2022? Well, you know what, we can't predict because everyone's case is different, but based on these trends, based on these trends, a lot less is changing than you might think in terms of what you should focus on in your application. So, yes, another note too is that history is on your side. So, the amount of international students that end up being admitted and going to the US to study has increased year over year in very general terms. So even with everything that's going on, there might be a slight dip in these years now, but it will definitely go back up. So putting it all together, take some deep breaths, don't panic, listen to our webinar, which you're doing right now, so check. Be resourceful about what you can do, how you can make the most of your time, even if you're resource limited in other ways, and really think about how you can make your narrative stand out. Think about what you did during this time to make it through and how you made the most of your situation. And also with a lot of different online and hybrid options and all of that, keep your options open because maybe a kind of schooling that you would not have considered previously might make more sense now depending on where you are in your life. Okay, so now in terms of the big picture, in terms of thinking about your application, the rules for getting into top schools have not actually changed that much. So hopefully that's a helpful feeling. So there are a lot of pitfalls that we talk about, that we've talked about in the past and we will continue to talk about because a lot of students make this over and over. And even in these COVID times, if you can avoid these pitfalls, you will be okay. So we want you to avoid copying your friend. So for example, you may see that, okay, so-and-so, my friend did this, so I'm just going to do the exact same things, join the exact same activities, get the same kinds of experiences, and I will get into that school too. The answer is that is not, that is not the case. What worked for your friend might not work for you or won't work for you because each applicant is unique. And you really want to think about what is it about you that makes you stand out and your goals, and how does that make you the best mutual fit with your school that you're applying to. Also, there are going to be a lot of people in your life who want to give you advice about what to do because of what they went through. We call this having too many cooks in the kitchen, and sometimes it can be hard for you to decide who to listen to. So it's really good to have a trusted mentor, hint, hint, maybe someone like me or Lisa, who can really work with you, get to know you super well, and understand what it takes to make your application spark up. Also, in light of these test optional days, focusing too much on scores is really it was something that we wanted to say before, but even more so now. You may be wondering, should I take the SAT or the ACT or the GRE or what have you? And sometimes that might make sense still, especially if your school still requires it. But if the school is test optional, then you should take it, but maybe depending on your score, there might be other aspects of your application that are worth highlighting more instead and focusing more on, because that's where you can really show your strengths. Also, a lot of times, and I would say this is more important in undergraduate applications, is that there's this idea that you have to show how well-rounded you are, that you have your one sport, your one instrument, your one academic subject that you're an international winner on, and the one volunteer activity. And if you check off all of these boxes, then you're going to get into the school. That's exactly what they're looking for. And while I wish there were a formula, that would be really great. That would make everyone's jobs easier. Unfortunately, it's just not that simple. And while I think that advice, like just follow your passion, can sound really simplistic, being able to think about and reflect on what it is you really enjoy, what you care about, and following where that leads you, that in fact is more powerful than trying to check off any boxes that you think someone is trying to make for you. Also related to that, misidentifying what is actually unique. So a lot of times, you'll think that, oh, if I do this thing, no one else has ever done it before. A lot of times people have, someone else has done that. So don't focus too much on that, but think about, if you step back from your profile, on the whole, what is a way that you could kind of sum up who you are and what you're about in a way that is going to be a little bit different from everyone else. And I love how active this comment the chat is. We will do our best to answer the ones that apply to kind of the general bigger group of people. So if you have, I would say if you have individual questions, folks, about like, should I do this or that? We won't be able to answer that for your specific case, but we'll try to answer for the bigger group. Okay. So the biggest sort of pitfall for all of this is viewing admissions as a contest of who looks the best today. Here's what I mean by this. A lot of times people will say, well, excuse me, Athena, I have perfect grades. I have done this and that, and I look good. Why won't Harvard accept me? I know that's a bit exaggerated, but the reason that that sort of thinking is flawed is because people are thinking that, or if you have this mindset, you're thinking that I have achieved X, so therefore I am entitled to Y. And it's really not about what you have done up to this point, and it's not about what those accomplishments just are and what they stand for. It's really about what they imply for your ability to succeed in the future. This is a really big point. This is a key difference, a key mistake that people make. So how do you shift your thinking from that? Okay, so think of yourselves as a rubber band. This is one of our favorite metaphors because it makes sense. A lot of times the application that the profile that you're presenting is what you look like today. And so if you're just saying, oh, well, look at my accomplishments, look at this, look at what I've done, that's you, a rubber band at rest. Schools don't care about that. What they care about is how far that rubber band can stretch. So what is your ability? What could that rubber band do in the future? What could you do in the future? So what is the future potential that you're able to show through the accomplishments, the essays you've written, the way you sort of put it together in your profile? They don't care about what you look like today, but what you could look like tomorrow in the future. So they are looking for indicators. Colleges are looking for indicators of future success. So if you only remember one thing from this presentation, it's that. It's how you can show, it's how you can indicate that you will be able to succeed when you get to that college, to that grad program, whatever, and beyond after you graduate. Okay, so why does this matter to schools? It's because they have a lot of different things institutionally that they need to care about. So you can see there's a cycle of having a great reputation that can attract more great applicants, make them seem more selective, and then that allows them to get even better caliber students, even more success and visibility, and that helps their reputation. So it's a bit maybe cynical sounding, but it is true that institutionally, schools have a priority to have a great reputation so that they can contribute to this cycle of them having the best applicants possible who contribute to their schools, help their schools be even better, and then it's just a nice virtuous cycle from there. So understand that you're sort of fitting into that. Okay. So, so it is like an investment portfolio for the incoming. So when they're considering applications, it's almost like an investment portfolio. There's a lot beyond your control in terms of the kinds of students that they might admit. So I would say, especially at the undergrad level, sometimes you may have heard of the term legacy, right? So they might have legacy applicants or people that are probably going to get in because they have an association or a connection to something special, like a famous person, or they have a very unique athletic skill or something. Most of us don't fall into that. So you know what? Don't worry about it. Think about how you can take what you have and really mold that in your application to show your potential for future success, because that is what is in your control. So as this slide aptly says here, uncomplicated. Think of what you can and can't control. And so you can't worry about a lot of things that other people are bringing. You can only control what you're bringing to the table. So yes, future, 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 yesterday and today don't matter. Again, it's all about how you signal future success. So that's the big thing. That's something that I think a lot of times we don't focus on because we're thinking about like what are the different elements of the application. But I think if you remember this bigger picture piece, that will actually make your application stronger than if you're just thinking of it as checklists of things and highlight and accomplishments to highlight. Okay, so in terms of the undergraduate level of this, what are schools looking for? Thanks, folks. Looking at that, we have a 5-pointed star of glory that we like to discuss, and we have a version of this for the MBA level as well. So the different facets of the star. So we have S, seeking challenges, T, taking initiative, A, one of the A's, accepting risks, A, asking questions, and R, being resourceful. So these are the traits that when you think about, when you step back from your application and think, okay, well, what are some of the ways, what are some of the traits that I need to show that can help the admissions officer make the logical conclusion that I'm going to be successful in the future at this institution and beyond? These are the traits that you have to highlight. So when you're thinking about your essays, when you're thinking about the kinds of recommendations you might be getting, what teachers might be saying about you, when you're thinking about how you tell the school, here's what you want to study and why you care about a certain issue and how that a major at that school might help you get there. These are the traits that you need to think about and show. So ask yourself the question, when you're reading your profile, do you get a sense that the person you're reading about, yourself, that you're seeking challenges, that you can take initiative, that you can do all the things in the star, or at least a few of these things, If you say no to that, if you don't think that's coming through in your application, then that means you should rejigger it, you should rewrite some of that and make sure some of these traits are coming out. Okay. So in terms of the ultimate goal of your application for undergrad, so by the 12th grade, as you know, you want to have strong test scores, consistently strong grades that trend up, make sure that whatever extracurriculars you've done, you have engaged with some of them deeply, meaning you have had a leadership position, organized some sort of project, thought bigger than just, okay, I'm going to participate it, go to meetings, and that's it. And also, if you show them evidence that you have given back, that you're thinking of people beyond yourself, and that you have evidence of sort of thinking forward, having a vision, and all the things in the star that I just mentioned in that last slide. So that's where you have to get to when you're in 12th grade. So to get there, from 9th, 10th, 11th, you know, first, second, third year of high school. At the very beginning of that process, you want to plant seeds, you want to take risks, right? Explore, really see what you want to do. And then as you go through your second and third year, grow those seeds, water those plants, you know what I mean? Make adjustments, really at each point in the process, keep reflecting on what you need to do in order to fine tune what you're doing and to make sure you get to this 12th grade picture of yourself in which you're the strongest you've ever been at the things you love doing, and you're able to show your fullest potential, make the most of the resources around you and the opportunities around you in your community. So if you're able to follow that journey, you're going to be okay, and you'll be able to present that on your applications. And if you just follow all the things that I've talked about, you know, grow the seeds, try to think, reflect along the way about what you enjoy doing, follow that passion. And then when you get to the application process, write about yourself in such a way so that you're able to highlight your strengths and your traits, like being able to be resourceful, take risks, ask questions, all of that. That way, when you have that application being read, the reader will be able to think, oh, okay, this student has the potential to succeed and make the most of what we have at our school. Let's accept them. So you follow that, you're going to be okay. All right. So in short, turn your application reader into an advocate. I think that this advice is true across the board, whatever you're applying for, even when you're applying for jobs, friends. So make sure that you can get some sort of emotional reaction from them, make them remember you, basically, because there's going to be a lot of people who are saying something at least slightly similar, if not very similar. And the way that you stand out is by being able to explain that connection to the school that's unique for you, and also helping them understand what is your unique vision of your future life that the school able to help you get there. So make that person fight for you. It's the ultimate prize. Okay, and so now I'm going to switch it over to Lisa and to talk about grad schools and MBA.
Excellent. I hope that you can all hear me, so please type in if there's any problem with it. I've had a lot of chats coming in about what types of things we're covering, so I just want to clarify that there's two pieces to this. One is graduate school, and here we're focusing on master's programs and on PhD programs. The second part, I'll be talking about MBAs. We're not talking about law school or medical school at all in this webinar, so I just wanted to clarify. But when I talk about master's and PhD programs, it should apply to STEM programs, to more liberal arts PhD programs, so really a broad umbrella for the things that we're talking about. So let's start out by talking about the potential for future success. I've also seen a lot of questions in the chat pod about, should I do this and should I do that? And the really important point is that you have a story to tell. So it's not clearly that one activity or one program, one course is meaningful or not in a vacuum. What's really meaningful is that you are painting a picture of yourself that's comprehensive and consistent and shows a trajectory. So when we say avoiding non-value added activities, it's not that for me, if I'm applying for a STEM program, then perhaps, working on my artwork may not be that valuable. But if I'm applying for an arts program, then continuing to pursue my art entrepreneurial endeavors would completely be value added. So the value added is defined by what your own personal brand is. You want to focus on acing the GRE and the TOEFL. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Maintaining a high GPA, pursuing undergraduate research, creating connections with professors, and writing your killer personal statement. I'll go into each one of these bullets in a little more detail as we go through. So let's start out with value-added activities. So one of the important things is don't look at the value-added activities for your peers. What you really want to do is focus on things that provide more depth for your passions. Okay, so whatever you're passionate about, pursue it in its fullest. You do absolutely want to do well on all of your classes, but you don't have to focus all your energies on the classes and the activities that are not really directly in your stream of focus. You don't want to try to do as much as possible. Don't try to do anything that comes your way. The really important point, what admissions counselors are looking for, is they're looking for someone who really knows how to pursue something to its fullest, who shows excellence. So don't go for quantity, go for quality. Okay, and that's really an important thing to remember as you define that arc. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit more about GREs. Many schools are going test optional for the fall 21 cycle. And that is very different from excluded. And I saw some questions about not requiring at all. So optional does not mean they won't look at it. And so now you have a choice to make about whether you want to include that in your application. And if you can score highly relative to what their average GREs are, by all means. For engineering, you want to, if you can get a higher score in that 90th percentile plus on your quantitative GRE, that's going to be really critical. Now, obviously, they're saying it's not required. And what they're trying to do is make the programs accessible for people who have had great difficulty taking their GREs. But if you can take the GRE and you can show excellence, that's going to boost your application. Speaking of the TOEFL or the IELTS, there are some minimums that you'll need to target and look at the specific schools you're focusing on. For example, MIT has a 100 minimum, Stanford varies, 89 for the TOEFL. So you want to make sure that you're aligning your scores with those specific schools, and your scores on those exams may actually narrow down some of the schools that you can target, but those exams are still required. And I know that often scoring those GREs can really drive us crazy, right? We're taking them, trying to take them again, trying to make sure that we're hitting our targets. What you really do want to focus on is making sure if you're not scoring well, that you get some assistance in finding out exactly why. Because you can keep beating your head against the wall, keep retaking it and not really hitting and overcoming what that obstacle is. So focus on exactly where you're not performing at your best and focus your energies on that. And if you get against a wall where you've gotten the same score a couple of times, it may be time to change gears and focus on the things that you can have an impact on and focus on other ways that you can boost your application. So let's talk a little bit more about GPAs. This is really critical. And what's important is that you're focusing also on a very high GPA in your specialty area. And that's, you know, if you're going for engineering, right, and you happen to have a lower GPA in your history classes, that's not going to have as negative an impact as one in your major focus area. Overall, your GPA will also be really important in terms of getting prestigious fellowships, perhaps getting into honors, different types of honors programs, getting research assistantships and teaching assistantships. So though the GPA will be important in your application, but also in perhaps opportunities that come after you are accepted as well. So for those of you still in a research activity, research in undergraduate area, what we really want to think about is how can you boost your chances for a graduate program with the research activities you can do as an undergraduate. And I encourage you to find opportunities to work with faculty members who will challenge you, who will invest in you and push you to be your best. You want to work with professors who have an international experience and have experience working with undergraduates and getting them to the point where they are co-authors or supporting authors on publications. You don't want to focus and waste time on, you know, any type of research activity that's really not going to be produce an outcome that you can showcase in your application. Graduate programs want to see somebody who's capable of doing scholarly research. Let's talk a little bit more about what types of things would fall within those range. So if there are conferences where you can even submit a poster, presentations you can make to research colloquia, or school conferences, competitions where you can showcase your talents and compete against others at the same level. Internships are excellent opportunities for you to gain real world experience in that research area. And then finally, as I mentioned, publications. And these often don't, you don't need to have peer-reviewed journals as your first publications. You can focus on, easier targets in terms of maybe school newsletters or research activities that are broadcast from a specific department. So start lower and then move up to more challenging research publications. How do you identify professors and connect with them? And this is really important. So as an undergraduate, what you want to make sure that you can do is really develop relationships. So if you're in a larger class, make sure that you find opportunities to connect with faculty members. And you can ask them for advice on the programs that you're pursuing, on your summer internships, your study abroad. But start to develop those relationships. Those will ideally result in research, but they also can be important in the letters of recommendation that are going to be critical to you as you apply for graduate school. So now the ultimate sort of piece of your application is your statement of purpose. This is where you get to present yourself, your true self, pulling in all those pieces and telling your story. You want to be able to communicate who you are, where you've come from, what you've achieved so far, and where you're going. You want to explain why you're pursuing this research and explain it in a way that shows not only what you want to get out of it, but what you're going to contribute, how you'll contribute to your cohort, how you'll contribute to the research field, and how you'll contribute to the school's overall research agenda. So make sure as you tell your story that there's a true fit between your own passion and the contributions that you can make in that research stream. Let me now talk a little bit more specifically about MBA programs, because in graduate schools, master's programs, PhDs, we're focusing, the real core of that application is your academic abilities. And as we've mentioned, your research experiences. When we move into MBA programs, we have somewhat of a different focus. So now let's look again at that 6-pointed star. What MBA programs are looking for is leadership, evidence of leadership. It can be leadership in undergraduate activities, leadership in your work, leadership in sports. You want to be somebody who's doing something completely differently, mold breaking, somebody who's pushing the boundaries. You have to be inward looking, and by that we mean self-aware, a really good sense of your own strengths and weaknesses and how an MBA can add to your profile. That's where the outward looking comes in. How does your trajectory fit in? Where does the MBA fit in? And where does that specific school fit in to where you plan to be in the next 5 years, 10 years? You want to really focus on making sure that that AdCom can look at your application and understand what makes you tick, what your plan is, and what an asset you would be to that MBA cohort. So now let's dig in a little bit deeper into future success with specifically the MBA program. Again, the same thing, non-value added activities. The GMAT and the TOEFL, we have the same issues that we do with the GRE in terms of required versus optional, and focusing on making sure that you can use that as an asset to your application. At this point in time, GREs and GMATs are interchangeable. Most business schools will allow you to take a GRE instead of a GMAT. So if you are taking a GRE for a different program, you can use that as well. As we mentioned, leadership is critical. And so if the more that you can demonstrate that in any part of your experiences, the more you will position yourself as somebody who's prepared for an MBA program. A number of you have mentioned going directly to an MBA program from an undergraduate. And your ability to do that is really going to hinge on the amount of leadership experience you can demonstrate in your undergraduate, in your extracurricular, entrepreneurial, sports ventures. Without that, it would be really hard to go straight from an undergraduate to an MBA program. A couple of you have asked a little bit more about the timeline. And so what we're going to present to you is what a timeline looks like 2 years out from your application. And I know that seems like a long time, but a lot of your competitors are thinking about it this way. So as we were talking about in this presentation, from 2 years out, you're starting to think about, how can I gain leadership experience in my extracurriculars? How do I make sure I'm maximizing what I can earn in my GPA, especially in my core area? How am I establishing relationships with faculty members? As you get closer to a year away, you want to start to identify with different schools, look at where different faculty members are doing research, what specializations are for MBA programs, and identifying where your short-term and long-term career goals can align with what the skills that you'll earn in an MBA program. As we get closer to that application deadline, we're focusing on test scores, we're focusing on thinking about your statement of purpose and really honing in on who's going to write your letters of recommendation and then what they're going to say about you. What's really important to think about is that there are different ways that mentors such as Admissionato can get involved in these different programs at different points in time. So we often can consult with people early on in planning that trajectory, and then as you get closer to the application, and helping you identify what does your portfolio look like, and how do we help you tell that story in a way that presents you the best. And that all of those pieces can be folded together to help you develop that final application. So I hope this has been a comprehensive, quick rundown of the grad programs and the MBA programs. I want to flip this back to Athena to talk a little bit more about how exactly Admissionato can help you at these different stages of the process.
Great, thank you so much, Lisa. Okay, so just to give you all a little bit more information about us and where we're coming from, who are these people on the internet talking to you right now? So we're from Admissionato, as we mentioned. Here are some pictures of our founders, Raj and John, who started Admissionato out of the brilliant idea that, it's not just about, again, checking off things on a specific checklist, and that's the way to sort of ace your applications. Unfortunately, a lot of people focus on that, but really thinking about what is the combination between that sort of understanding of all the different data points that you need to have and need to address in the application, and also the way you sort of strategize and brand and have a really beautiful narrative that ties it all together. And that comes out of Raj's background in working in Hollywood and John's background going to HBS and focusing more on the quant-C data side of things. So in terms of how we sort of operate at Admissionato now, that you would work with a mentor. So someone, you can see the faces of different people you might work with in addition to Lisa or me. And those are the people that help you through every step of the process, from start to finish, answer every question you might have, and really give you intense feedback on different elements of your application. And on the back end, we have essay specialists or editors who are able to give you line by line feedback on your application essays and really help you shape that piece or a germ of an idea into something that's beautiful and multi-paragraph and is a great story that people want to read about. So it's that model that I think really works for us, and a lot of students have attributed that to their success in getting in. So that's something that we hope can help you as viewers of this webinar as well. And the 2 stages, there's a lot of 2s in this, as you'll see, because that's the way we think about this. So the 2 stages we have are, developing that story. Again, it's about showing your potential for future success, right? So I know there are a lot of questions about, what about this specific thing? Do grades matter? Yes, they do matter. Do test scores matter? Like, yes, they also matter. But really, at the end of the day, it's about the story that you're sharing and how compelling you're able to make that story. If you don't have a compelling story that, you know, someone else who has almost equal qualifications but a better story is always going to stand out more. So that's what you really need to bring to the table. Also, we help you craft and communicate that, so it kind of aligns with what schools are looking for. And the ways that we do that, so we offer, you know, 2 different sort of packages. And when you talk to Manya about this, they'll be able to provide more information about that. So that's just a little bit about us. Feel free to ask us more during the Q&A section. But if we just had to share a few parting words of wisdom, like we said earlier, focus on what you can control. You will hear a lot about, well, you know, the rates are being affected by these kinds of students, by legacies, by blah, blah, blah. But you know what? You can't, that's not in your wheelhouse. You can only control what you're showing in the application and how you're able to present your potential for future success. Focus on that. And despite the second thing, despite everything that's going on with COVID and the ways that you know, the admissions process has been impacted, the fundamentals are still the same. The components have been fairly stable, aside from the test score part. But this idea that, you know, showing future success, really thinking through what you care about and how you can present that well and effectively, that's really still what matters most. And also stay flexible. This is a long and arduous process. You're doing the right thing by attending this webinar and sort of, you know, getting those things, those ideas floating around in your head. But stay flexible, see what's out there, because what you think might be the best choice for you at this moment, that could change, and that's okay. This is supposed to be a journey of growth as much as it is a very stressful process of writing down everything that's happened in your life and what you want to happen in the future. So focus on that growth and that journey, and hopefully that will make things feel a little bit calmer. Okay, so now we'll give you time to ask questions. So we'd love to see your questions in the chat. And if one of your questions is, how do I ask you guys more questions after this? That number, that email address is right here on the screen. Take a screenshot, write it down, write us an email immediately, and we will get back to you. Okay, so thank you so much for listening. I would love to see, okay, so 7, let's see what is in the chat. Okay.
There is a question about a startup company, so
Yeah.
I can take that. And I
Sure.
assume you are meaning for an MBA program. I think just a shell of a startup company is not going to have an impact. But if you have a startup company that has some demonstrable outcomes, some things that you've already achieved, then by all means, that would be very helpful. So I would encourage you, if you have a company, make sure that you can focus on measurable outcomes.
And Lisa, this might apply. So someone is maybe more experienced, so they're having 12 years of work experience. Is there a cutoff for when you can apply for an MBA or for other grad school programs?
So, you know, if you have 12 years of work experience, what you'll want to do in an application is discuss why this is the right time for your MBA and what your 12 years of experience has added to your profile, what you can contribute to an MBA program and what you can get out of it because of the depth of experience. So you just want to explain how that contributes to your story.
Okay, yes, and another people I think are asking about different certifications. Is this undergraduate degree appropriate for, you know, going to a specific country for X thing, you know? So I think for those questions in general, it's best to reach out to universities that you're interested in as well, and seeing what they allow, don't allow, or who their program is more appropriate for. I will say, if you have an undergraduate degree in medicine or law, I know we're not talking about that, but the postgraduate sort of degrees, like LLMs or, you know, postgrad medicine in other countries, generally those are appropriate for you to pursue, but you really do need to ask the school and kind of figure that out. Okay, and so in terms of, let's see, how do you portray a gap year? Ooh, after graduation. That is a great question. So I'm assuming that you're in the middle of your gap year right now, or you're about to start one. Well, anyway, I'll just kind of speak to that. If you are in high school and taking a gap year and then applying to college, the way that you should think about that gap year is, one, what are some areas of weakness maybe that you are trying to address during that time? Maybe you had slightly lower grades when you're in high school, but now you've kind of figured out what you're interested in and what you want to study more in depth. A gap year can be a good time to do that, whether it's taking another class or an online class, doing independent research or an internship related to the field you're interested in, or some other activity that speaks to your academic interests. Perhaps you want to retake the SAT. I would say that's maybe a less compelling reason to have an entire gap year, but you could also do that during that time. The question that schools are going to be asking is, well, what did you do during that time and how did it make you a better person in some way or make you more prepared for going to college? So the answer to that question can involve a number of different activities, but that's the narrative that you have to present for that time. I don't know, Lisa, if like gap year for grad schools and how they think about that. I know it's different because they expect some work experience so. I don't know if there's anything.
There really isn't a gap year for graduate school. It's all the years between undergraduate and graduate and what you've done with them. And trajectories can look very different. There is one question here, Athena, about, and I think that maybe you can address this. Someone's concerned, they're worried about exposing themselves, health-wise when they take the SAT, and they know they're optional, but are worried about not having that SAT score. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that is a completely legitimate question. And yeah, unfortunately, there aren't sort of healthy options to be able to take the SAT like they said they would have, the College Board said they would have. So I think that because when colleges say they are test optional, they really mean it. They are not, it's not some sort of, kind of trick where they're saying, okay, well, if you didn't include one, now it's going to impact your application in X way, or you won't be considered as highly. It's really, truly test optional. So if you have legitimate reasons for not being able to take the SAT or take the ACT, then it is okay. Do not take it and think about the other components of your application. Now, the one sort of caveat of that is because that part of your application is not there, which is okay, it just means that the other parts of the application will be considered differently. Now you might say, well, Athena, do you mean that now, one part matters way more than, test scores? And I think I addressed this a little bit during the presentation that, when we say holistic, they have to know sort of a few things, right? So under potential for future success, one of those parts is, do they have the potential for future academic success? And the components of your application that speak to that really are, your grades, to some extent your test scores, and to some extent the recommendations that your teachers give you. So if you don't have one of those data points, then naturally they're going to look at the other two things, right? They're going to look at what are the grades that you got at school, especially in the subject that you're interested in. What do your teachers say about your performance in class or how you contribute? So it makes sense that if you have two things now instead of three things, there's going to be a lot more looking at the two things they have in front of them than three things. So that's the way you have to consider the importance of the SAT. So, everyone's situation is different, but if you're not going to take the SAT, totally okay, but just make sure that your grades and your recommendations and maybe even your essays can speak to your academic success and can show that through line between what you have done and what you want to do when you get to college and beyond.
Athena, do you want to talk a little? I've seen a couple of questions on the topic of letters of recommendation and how to choose someone, and I think that's a great topic. So I'll address the MBA and master's part if you want to talk about the undergraduate part.
Do you want me to go first? Okay, yes. Okay, so for undergrad, so I realized too that during the undergrad section of our presentation today, I really wanted to focus on the big picture because there are a lot of places you can Google, like what are the different components of the application. And I think what a lot of people don't highlight is, you know, this potential for future success and how that's the sort of biggest theme that needs to come across from your application. But just to recap, so components of the application, right? Test scores, as you know, may or may not be optional, grades, letters of recommendation, essays, yes, those are the big things. And there may or may not be an interview or resume, but those are less important. So in terms of those components, with letters of recommendation, the way to go about that is to think, okay, well, one, what is the subject that I may want to study or the general realm? So for example, if you want to go into pre-med or into the STEM fields, it makes sense that you should ask a teacher from the STEM fields. So, you know, science teacher, math teacher, whatever, someone who's taught you in the past year, preferably, to write a recommendation for you, because you want to have someone who can speak to the fact that you like the subject that you say you want to study in college, and that you have the academic proficiency to pursue that at the level of depth that a college is expecting. A lot of colleges may only want one recommendation. For the colleges that want two or more, for your second letter recommendation, a lot of times you'll hear the advice to pick someone from a contrasting field. So if your first recommendation is from, you know, a STEM subject, then maybe your second teacher is from English class or from a humanities or social sciences from a non-STEM course. It's okay though if you don't have a teacher from a contrasting field, but if you have another STEM teacher that wants to write a recommendation for you, that's okay. I think the most important thing is that the people who can write about you can write very strongly positive things. That is the single most important thing. If they can write, they should be able to write strongly positive, enthusiastic, I mean, maybe not exclamation points, but very, very highly enthusiastic things about you. If they can't, then, you know, that's not going to be as powerful as someone else who's able to get that level of enthusiasm from the recommenders. So I would say that's the biggest thing to remember. If some schools are asking for even more recommendations, or you're maybe asking the question, should I get like 5 recommendations from people who can speak well with me? Will that help me? There is a limit. There are diminishing returns the more recommendations you provide to a school. Excuse me. At most, I would say 1 to 2 more recommendations, and think about who can provide a different angle of your character. So for example, you might want to pick an adult who knows you outside of school in a leadership position in a club that you've been a part of for a long time, or an organization you've started, or maybe you're doing research with someone, with a professor, and they can speak to the way what you've accomplished in your research. So those are just some ideas. Definitely do not pick a family friend. That can kind of blow up your application if someone just writes, I've known them since they were born. I'm really great friends with their dad. You should totally pick this person. No, for US applications, that is just a no-go. So just avoid that. Whoever you pick, make sure they know you in a sort of professional or academic setting or sort of volunteer leadership setting. Make sure they can speak enthusiastically about you. And just make sure you're highlighting sort of different aspects of your character and your academic performance through that combination of recommendations.
Athena, I just have a couple of things, because I think for the master's and MBA, many of those pieces of advice, they definitely hold. Often with MBAs, people will want to pick the CEO of their company or somebody important in business to write the recommendation. It really doesn't matter who the person is or what job they have. What matters is that they can talk specifically about your experiences. So for an MBA, you want somebody perhaps who's been your boss or your boss's boss that can discuss specific examples of how you've demonstrated leadership or courage or resilience. That's really what you want. Someone who knows you well enough and has been in situations where you've demonstrated your skill set that they can directly address. So that's what's really important. Find somebody who knows you well enough to give those examples. And someone had asked one more thing, academic or business. For an MBA, you always want people that you have worked with that can show leadership. So it can be in nonprofit ventures, it can be in your jobs or internships, generally not faculty members. For GREs or PhDs, you can have a mix of both people who've seen you in a work environment and people who can attest to your academic endeavors.
Ooh, that's a great, yeah. So what if your school is not as well resourced and doesn't have any clubs or activities related to something? That's a question I'm seeing here. Yeah, that happens a lot. And I'm sorry that's happening. I know it's not the best situation. So in terms of so I'd like for you to think about the traits, right, in the star that we showed you earlier. And one of those is one of those traits that you need to show is resourcefulness. So think about what you can do beyond your school, right, in order to show that you have this interest and that you're trying to do more. Or maybe if your school has no clubs, can you start a club related to that, right? Like, because then you're able to show your leadership in starting that club, and you're able to provide an experience to someone else who might want that but wouldn't have known about it if you hadn't started it, and you get to explore your interest in fashion design even more. But there's a lot that you can do to create and to make art, to make cool pieces that don't depend on what your school has to offer. So I think that's a bigger sort of point for everyone, is that if something doesn't exist in the environment you're currently in, one question you should ask yourself is, well, can I make it? Can I start that thing? Because that will be a great experience for you in terms of management and leadership and all of that, but also you're going to be able to share and kind of pay forward in terms of having an opportunity exist for someone else who might want that as well. So that's a good sort of way to approach it. Also think about what you can do online and how you can connect with other people who are interested in that thing online. So whether it's sort of virtual discords or groups, right? There's ways you can get involved with that, classes you can take, or online internships. There's a lot of ways around that, but sometimes you just have to be willing to kind of do it yourself or make it happen. Okay. Yeah, due to the pandemic, I couldn't do, yeah. So a lot of people, so I think another very legitimate question is, I had some plans, but because of the pandemic, everything got messed up. I won't be able to do X thing. And yeah, I totally feel for you, Aruma, like that. That's not a great situation. So I would say that you can try to see what's available. If something's not available now, which I imagine there won't be anything right now, see what's available for kind of the future before your application, maybe in starting September or October or so. See what you can do again online. Maybe if there's a literature review or something that's not dependent on lab work that you could do, maybe that might be helpful. Or maybe if you can do anything else sort of related that to continue your independent studies in your subject of interest. I mean, something to show that even though there's a pandemic, you are trying your best to engage and to deepen your knowledge of a subject. I would say that's the way to approach that. Okay, someone asked me about extracurricular activities. Lisa, also let me know if you want to step in.
I'm happy to take that if you want me to.
Yeah, please,
I think
please.
as we had talked a little bit before about, it's not the breadth of extracurricular activities. It really depends on what you do with them. So if you are involved in a club and you've been involved for 3 years and now you're the president, that's great. And it's even better if it's somewhat aligned with some of your interests. But an extracurricular activity that you sort of pick up maybe in your senior year and just kind of attend meetings, that's not going to make a difference. So it's not the activity, it's really the commitment that you've made and the increasing level of responsibility and engagement that you can demonstrate. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Athena?
No, that's perfect. And yeah, I mean, we're getting some related questions too about, well, if I do Someone's like, if I just do work and study, is that okay? Or do I have to take on something? And what I was about to type in the chat was that, again, so this is what Lisa said, it's not about how many things you're doing. It's really about how you're portraying this commitment that you have. And also showing, again, remember guys, it's about how you show your potential for future success. So for some candidates, they'll have on their resume or on their list of activities that they've worked, they've studied, and they've volunteered at something, right? For others, it might be that they had this really intense job while they were studying. For others, yet it might be, they had some family responsibilities and this other thing going on and they were studying. So you should always be studying, right? Because, or showing that you have this academic interest, because after all, you're trying to go back to school or go to school. But in terms of everything else that goes with that combination is just so different and unique for everyone. It's really not about checking off things on a list. It's about how you're able to create a narrative that shows how you did that thing, how you did those things, why you did them, and what that means for you going forward when you go to undergrad, graduate school, or MBA. Yeah. I know that some people had questions earlier about scholarships. So I can speak to that at the undergrad level, if Lisa, you want to take the grad school part. So for undergrad, I will say it's super hard for international students to get scholarships, just full stop. And I want to start with that because I don't want anyone to leave this with the kind of, false hope that you're just going to apply to Harvard and you're going to get a scholarship. I mean, you might, but for different reasons. So for a lot of schools, especially like the Ivy Leagues, including Harvard, right, schools at the top, they only offer what we call need-based scholarships. So need-based means they look at what your family income is or what your assets are, and then they determine how much aid to give you based on that. It is not based on merit. That's the other kind of scholarship. Merit scholarships are based on your grades, your activities, what you're presenting on your application, and how much you're sort of above and beyond their typical incoming class, and what incentive they can give you to attend their school. So need-based, merit-based. If you want a need-based scholarship, very few schools in the US offer need-based scholarships to international students. And usually it's schools in the top echelon, so top tier, Ivy League, top 20, whatever. And it will state very clearly in their financial aid websites whether they offer need-based aid to international students. So check that out. If you want a merit-based scholarship, the way to think about this is think about where you are in relation to sort of the average members of the incoming class of that school. If you are above average, you are more likely to get a merit scholarship because they want to, again, institutional priority, increase the caliber of the students coming in and get the best students they can possible. So if you're sort of above average, if people are here and you're kind of here, they're going to want you to come in. They're going to throw money at you and be like, hey, come to our school. If you're sort of if you're at the sort of 50th percentile, right, you're sort of matching where everyone is, you're less likely to get a merit scholarship. So where might you be above average, right? So I would say look more at private schools, smaller mid-tier private schools or lower tier private schools. That's where you're more likely to get a merit scholarship in the States. As a rule of thumb, generally public universities in the States, so like the University of California system, University of Michigan, University of X, they generally do not offer merit scholarships to international students or just any scholarships whatsoever. So that's a trade-off that you might have to navigate as you're applying to schools. Okay, I think we're almost at time. Yeah, so let's see, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Let's see. Yeah, again, I will say it one more time. It's not about should I do X, Y, or Z specifically. It's about how those things that you end up doing show your potential for future success and highlight the different traits that we've told you are important. So resilience, intellectual curiosity, resourcefulness, those sorts of traits. Because if you're able to show those traits through whatever you're presenting, then you've achieved your goal. They're going to see that you're a good fit for the school. Okay. let's see, trying to think anything else. U.S. citizens living in India and studying abroad. Yeah. So for financial aid purposes, you will be American. You will be considered a U.S. citizen, but for the sort of admissions process and consideration of your application, you'll be compared to other students applying from India and that or whatever country you're based in. So yeah. And okay, in terms of timelines, yeah, I mean, I will say that the earlier you start thinking about the different components of the application and plan out when you're going to do those things, the better, right? It's always better to plan instead of doing things at the last minute. Yeah, and it's okay if you take the GRE or SAT or whatever now, and then you decide later which schools you want to send those scores. Completely okay. Any other questions that you're seeing, Lisa?
No, I think a lot of the other questions are very specific. So those are questions that need to be asked in terms of people's own backgrounds. Someone said something, BA program in finance. So just remember that Harvard, there's not finance. Harvard's a liberal arts school, so it would be economics. And so I'm not sure about easier compared to STEM. I would really focus not as much on the major that you're choosing when you apply as an undergraduate, as we've talked about, that whole story, right? Because a lot of undergraduates show up and they change majors, and everybody they expect that. So it's not that if you apply in one major, it's going to be easier for you to get in than in the other. That major that you're talking about needs to fit with your story. What you've done before, what you're passionate about, where you see yourself in the future.
Yeah, a lot of these, I don't mean to sound, but like Google is your friend here. And so if you're having questions about like, okay, well, what is this major like at this school, or do they offer X? I will say school websites can be very hard to navigate, but the answers are there. And if you don't find them on the website, definitely email them and ask. And I say this because universities as institutions in the US, they're quite independent. A lot of them they kind of do things their own way. So you want to really look at each school that you might be interested in and see what they say they offer. That's really going to help you out here. Yeah. So, okay, can you apply for dual degree majors? Yes, you can if the school offers that. Again, Google is your friend here. Okay, creating Instagrams or social media about your topic of interest, that could help. I have had students, these are high school students, I will say, but they have created YouTube pages or Facebook pages or really tried to, or blogs about what they're interested in. That can help. I would say, I mean, Lisa, you can speak to this at the graduate level. It's probably less effective than maybe other experiences, but if you're resource limited during the pandemic, I mean, it's better than not doing anything, right?
Yeah, and I think it's about being resourceful. So everyone had limitations during the pandemic in terms of what they could do. The question is, what did you do instead? How did you use your time? What do you have to show for it? So I think that there's a lot of latitude now because some of the primary choices were not available. So the question is, what else did you find to do?
Yeah. And I will say, if you're contacting professors, please do not just email like, hey, I need help doing this. Can you help me? no one's going to respond to that. Like, or if they do, they're going to say, sorry, I have reached bandwidth. Lisa's a professor and she's plumb something. So yeah, but people will not ask you, people will not help you if you're just like, I need help, can you help me? But you have to think about, okay, well, what are some specific elements of their profile that might be a match with your research interests? What are 1 or 2 specific questions that you can, ask them about that maybe will take them a few minutes to answer at most, or places that they can maybe direct you to if you're not sure where to go, right? So really make those any emails or outreach that you do, like I do think it's a good practice to reach out to people, but make sure that what you're asking is not just like, how can you help me? But like, what's a way that we connect very specifically, and what are 1 or 2 very specific things that I'm not sure about that I could use your guidance on? If you do that, they're more likely to respond than not. So, and that's how I would respond to. So. If you want to be a visiting undergraduate student, so again, every school has different rules, but so read those on their website, but you'll have to work out between your school and their school what credits you might get from that semester or time abroad, sort of what the logistical things are about that, and you might have to prepare. I mean, I assume you'll have to prepare at least a semester in advance, maybe a year in advance. Also with visas, that can be a difficult thing. So very different process, but look at each school's website for more information. How to follow up if professors are not responding to emails. Yeah, so give them a week or 2, follow up once. If they don't respond after 2 times, then I would just move on. Yeah. Also,
again, it depends what you're asking. Oftentimes I've received ones where they're asking me to do all this work for someone that I don't really know. And it's like, oh, can you give me a list of things that I should read? And I might not respond because the person hasn't shown initiative. The other way to do that is to say, look, I'm really interested in this research topic and I've read your paper. Can you give me some insight into how I learn a little bit more about X, Y, and Z? Show that you've done your homework, that you have some common interest, and that you've prepared. Don't throw it all on the faculty member to prepare a reading list for you.
Yeah. Okay, so it seems like we've come to the end with questions, but I know there are many more. So we have the information for contacting us further here on the slide. Make sure you get that before you leave. Otherwise, thank you so much for your attention and for your engagement. We really appreciate it. Yeah. Have a great day. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.